Hey everyone, I'm Haley. I'm the Hope for HIE social worker, and we have one of our amazing peer mentors here, Romm. He is going to share with us today a little bit about his family's experience with AAC and communication devices. So, Romm, without further ado, if you don't mind just kind of introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your family's journey, we can't wait to hear.
Sure. Thank you, Haley. So I'm Romm. I am from Australia. Haley and I are talking 12 hours apart. My son, Bodhi, is 9 this year, and he does have complex communication needs. So our journey, I have to say, was probably easier than some of the stories I've heard out there. And we've ended up using the Tobii eye gaze, which uses the pod picture booklet, which is obviously an electronic version that we use. But how we got there, obviously Bodhi was too young to use Tobii eye gaze until he was about 3 and 4. And we had a team of an occupational therapist and a physiotherapist that worked with us. And when it got to that stage where we thought, okay, we need to start using alternative means of communication, we were given a few choices and a few ideas, and the one that everyone sort of directed us to was the eye gaze technology, or the Tobii eye gaze. So that's TOBII, eye gaze technology. And we got given a loan from the speech therapist. We were obviously referred to the speech therapist, who then sort of met with us, talked us through our goals and our needs. I should say Bodhi's goals and needs. And from there, we created a plan and sort of step-by-step process of how we're going to do that. First and foremost, we were given an example of one, or a computer that had eye gaze on it, and we tested that and used that with the help of the speech pathologist or the speech therapist. And once we were accustomed with that, we then applied to the NDIS, which is our insurance scheme in Australia. So our therapist helped us with the paperwork there, and then we applied for it. And then quite a few months later, we received it. But up to that and leading, and still using it, we had what we call a pod book. So that's PODD book, and you can work with your speech pathologist to have customized photos, and basically there's images and words associated with those images on a book. You go through and ask questions of Bodhi or your child, and your child will indicate which line or which sort of what he's trying to communicate with you. And then with those pictures, they will associate to a chapter, if you will, and you would flip to that chapter. So if he wants to, play, he would choose the play picture. Okay. And then you would flip to the next. Well, you would then go to the play section and choose those words. So the Tobii eye gaze is an electronic version of that, where he will use his eyes. His eyes will focus on a picture that will then give him the options of what he wants to communicate, and then he would place together a sentence. And when he's ready, he presses enter with his eyes. Okay. And then that would say a sentence. Okay. Now, what advice I would give to anyone getting that or then using it is more about the use of it. Is really be intensive about it, and potentially maybe meet up with other families and other children with similar and talk about it and use it that way. Okay. That's how I would go about it.
And in the interim, I know you mentioned that you kind of trialed a little bit, and then they had the kind of a loaner device. While you're waiting on that authorization, I know you said it took, a few months or so. Did you have a device available to you, or did you go back to using the pod book until you got approved for your official device?
We we still had our therapy sessions with our speech pathologist. So they had one there that we could, every week we would have one. And then, yes, we did have the pod book that we could also practice on.
Okay. So the loaner device was just sort of to trial at the clinic. It didn't go home with you for you to.
Oh, it did come home. Yeah.
It did come home?
Okay. That one did. Yeah.
Okay.
But then that had to move on to the next person.
Okay. So you were able to use that device in the interim while you were waiting on the official approval and to get your specific device for Bodhi.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's helpful for people to know, just that in that waiting period, find out based on, your situation, if you're able to bring a device home and use one while you're waiting to get your more permanent device.
Yeah. I don't know if they cost the same in America, but it's fairly expensive here.
Yes. My understanding really is kind of everywhere. It's very expensive and it's very different country, even, insurance company in the States specific. So that's one of the reasons we're so happy to have everyone on this series, is because we have people from all over the globe that have had all different types of devices for their child. And then all different experiences. So that way families can really get a big, broad idea of what's available and then see, what they think would be best for their situation. And they can bring all these great tips and tricks that you and all our other panelists are providing to their team to say, hey, other parents have mentioned this. Is this something that we can do? So a couple more questions. So as far as coverage for that in Australia, is that something that you have to pay like a portion, or is it fully covered by the health system there?
Yes, it is fully covered, but not everyone can get it. Obviously, you have to have certain thresholds, and your therapist have to say this is something you need.
Okay.
But I think it would be very obvious to anyone that, if your child is nonverbal or non-talking, I should say, then you'd have to start looking at alternative communication devices.
And is this something where?
And yes, it is covered by the NDIS.
Sure. Is this something where like every so many years you're eligible for like a new one, or they change the technology, or how does that work? What have y'all had to do since he got his original device?
Yeah. Okay. So we've had it for, I think, 3 years, maybe 4 years now. The technology so far is staying the same, but it's the software that is, once you've upgraded, it doesn't change anything too much. It's still the same. It just gets faster, or you get, or you can create more icons or things like that. In terms of the hardware, so far, we haven't had to change it, and I don't think we'd need to, because unless he evolves a lot more in terms of his speech and capacity, we're pretty much stable on that for a little while.
Okay. Is there any other tips or anything you think that might be helpful or you would recommend to a parent while they're navigating, whether that's for like which device to choose? Was that something where, they gave you 4 or 5 options, or is it usually maybe just 1 or 2 different options? Or anything you thought through the process that, I wish somebody kind of would have told me a little more about this, or I wish we would have had this option that I didn't know about when I started?
I think in Australia there isn't too many of that type of that option. There are, but we weren't made too aware of it. Basically, talking to several people, including other families with children with complex communication needs, that was the one that was the most obvious. So in Australia, I think we're probably a little bit behind maybe the States or other countries in that tech, but the Tobii eye gaze is pretty good.
And then I would assume that goes with Bodhi kind of everywhere. So you take it when you're out and about, it goes with him to school, or any kind of events that he's attending. Is that correct?
Excuse me. Yeah. So we have a stand. We also have a table stand. And we're currently in the process of putting a attachment to his wheelchair.
Okay. So then that way it can kind of move along around with him as he's going about his daily activities.
Yep. And actually, that would be something I would try and recommend doing, is try and getting it attached or in a position where you can use it quite spontaneously and reactively. You know, if you've got it in a bag, it's pretty hard to go, okay, hang on a second, I don't know what you're trying to tell me, let me, and then you're trying to plug it in and set it up, because you've got to get it at the right angle, which is the trickiest part, because the technology, the hardware needs to focus on your eyes in the right spot. And it might take a couple of minutes before it's actually in the great position to be used. Otherwise, if you're sitting next to your child, it could actually be picking up your eyes. Yeah. So that is actually a little bit of advice. Is try and get it attached straight away and accessible straight away, so that you can use it all the time, not just specific times.
So I just want to thank you so much, Romm, for taking the time out of your day to share about your experience, and your family's experience, because I know this is going to help a lot of families in our community.
Always happy to help. Thank you, Haley.
Thank you, Allison, so much for being here with us. I'm so excited to have you share about your family's journey with communication with your child. So if you want to go ahead and get started and share with us about your journey so far.
Yeah, not a problem. So my son is 7. We live in Massachusetts in the United States. He currently uses an eye gaze system for communication. It's very, very new though, so we're definitely in the beginning stages of it. We first started with communication probably when he was about 1.5 years with early intervention. We started utilizing switches to get him to like activate toys or, basic, simple cause and effect. We used an iPad with like, changing the color on the screen on the game or something just very basic. And then we started with a speech therapist outpatient when he was probably just before 3. We first started using a switch with an iPad with the app TD Snap. At that point it was free. Now I know it's a paid app, but back then it was a one-time purchase. So we utilized that with one singular switch with him. His access point was his temple. He has very limited use of his hands. So we found that with, putting it at his head, he was able to, navigate through. Definitely relies on the auditory aspect of it. He has cortical vision impairment. So it was very difficult to even get to the eye gaze at point. So this is where we started. And then he kind of just kept showing that, he was getting it and starting to like request things, and definitely used it to deny. He loves saying no, as most, at that point, 4-year-old boys did. And then, we continued to work with his speech therapist at school. And then we work with an outpatient therapist at the local therapy clinic. And then he goes to the big children's hospital here in Massachusetts. So we got connected with the AAC clinic there. We got connected with her probably backtracking before he was even 3 and in the school system. We did an evaluation with her, and she's the one who kind of has steered his communications and like which devices we're using, and kind of helping us through the insurance process and collecting all the data. So we have did like an evaluation with her, and then periodically we did like therapy appointments with her, just to kind of check in, see what buttons he was accessing, seeing if we needed to like adjust his, words that he was using or anything to that sort. As time went on and we were able to collect more data that he was proficient with the switches, we started trialing an eye gaze. We went to her office and did like therapy appointments and just tried out different ones, see which ones worked for him. We ended up liking the Smartbox 13. It just came out in April. That camera is the one that picked up his face the best with his glasses. He had a really hard time for some reason with the other cameras. They weren't recognizing his face. he also tends to keep his eyes very positioned upwards. So that was probably part of it as well.
Okay.
But the Smartbox 13 camera works great for him. It recognizes his eyes, his face. It's been fabulous. When we first put the evaluation in, the 12 was only out. And then as we were about to submit to insurance, the rep told us like, hey, you might want to hold off for a little bit. The new version's coming out next month. So kind of put a pause on it, even though that delays it in the long run, but just so we could have the most up-to-date device.
Sure.
So his eye gaze now is that, the Smartbox 13, but he uses VocoChat as his like vocabulary on it. Like I said, we just got it maybe 2 months ago, not even. So we're very, very new with it. He loves playing the games. He's very motivated by the games, as most 7-year-old boys are. But then he uses the VocoChat a lot for right now, just like, yes, no, like, don't like. We make sure it's available to him pretty much at all times. So we have a wheelchair mount for it.
Okay.
And it's positioned for him specifically because of the way his eyes work and his cortical vision impairment. It's pretty close, within 18 inches of his face, and it's positioned at an upward angle and then kind of facing down at him. That seems to be the best way he's successful with it. And then we also have at home, we have a floor mount. So we do the same thing. Like if he's laying in bed, we have it off to the side, just keeping that exposure there that, it's there if you want to use it. Sometimes he is like very much just not into it, especially when he's like laying in bed watching TV. He's just like, yeah, I don't care. But, it's, at this point, he's definitely using it a lot for yes, no, like, don't like. We have a button that's called Quick Words. It's that like stop, go, more, all done. The very like basic demand request denials. He is also very quickly learning the goodbye button. The dog was barking the other day and it was Murphy, goodbye. Murphy, goodbye. So he is learning.
I've had enough of you.
Yeah, like he's deaf. And then the other day at speech, we hadn't seen her in a few weeks because of, appointments and whatnot. And I was filling her in on what has happened over the last few weeks. And he told me to goodbye. So
Bye, Mom.
Yep. So he's definitely picking up on it. It's definitely, a hit or miss sometimes, but we're hoping just with more exposure, he'll become more proficient with it. He has a page that's called like Funny Goodbyes, and it's all these different, like, his favorite one to say is got a Swiss jellyfish or a chopped lollipop.
I love it.
Yeah. So trying to make it fun and engaging for him. But also if he doesn't want to use it, not forcing it either. What I really like about the Smartbox is it also still has switch options. So if he's just having a day where his vision's just not there, with his cortical vision impairment, sometimes especially if he's sick or just not like having a good body day, we can put the switch on and he can still utilize the device. It doesn't have to just be eye gaze.
And how does that work? Like walk us through kind of what that would look like and how you would kind of transition to that.
So if I just notice, like, if he's just not like looking a lot, or, maybe he is just showing me signs of discomfort, like a higher heart rate, or maybe he's having like a, tough day, like with his spasticity, he'll just kind of look away from it a lot. He won't engage a lot. So I'll just like ask him, I'll be like, are you having a tough day? Usually I'll ask him to like lift a hand or look at me, like using body communication at that point to kind of figure things out. Usually he's pretty good about telling me with his body about what he wants to do or not do. So at that point I can set the switch up to it so he can still do auditory scanning. Or some days we just don't do it and we just do body language because that's what he's capable and that's where he's at that day. And that's okay too. Every day doesn't have to be a high-tech communication day. He's really great about, pouting, looking away, lifting an arm up, even if it's just slightly, because he doesn't have a huge use of the arms, but he'll just take his hand and kind of lift it up just a little bit. So, that I'll say, like, if you want to sit on the couch and watch TV instead of lay in bed to lift your arm up. So we'll kind of rely on those more low tech, just like in the moment options, and we'll put the eye gaze away for a little bit, and then we'll reintroduce it later and see if he's ready, if he's willing, and if not, that's okay too. It does go to school with him. They use it right now. He is in a medically complex classroom with 4 other kids. They are all utilizing eye gaze at this point. So it's pretty cool to see them all in together, or at least trialing at this point. They're all utilizing it. And then they have a school button on his eye gaze. So like anything school related will be under that button. So like his morning meeting, like the weather, colors, numbers, all, he's in 2nd grade. So all the basic stuff is under that button to make it more easily accessible to him. Eventually it might, go out into more like categorical buttons, like, more of like, trying to think like animals, and then break it out to like farm animals, pets. Right now, it's just like the common ones they use in the classroom are under animals, and they're all there. So, as his vocabulary expands and as school expands, the buttons will expand with him. But right now, we try to keep it very functional without being too overwhelming. He definitely can tire out pretty quick with the cortical vision impairment. I know it's, with the eye gaze, it can be really tricky. So that's why we definitely like to have that switch option as well. If, he's just not looking, we'll hook the switch up. Sometimes we can give him both options too. Like,
that's great.
If you can, it's just a quick button, so you can switch it back and forth. Like, or, so we still have his old iPad. So I'm like, we can set this one up and then you can have this one if you really want. It's, there's just kind of letting him guide us with obviously some assistance, as, and definitely keeping mind of that total body communication underlying with the, that's, all of us go with our basic communication when we need to. So it's, sometimes not utilizing the high tech option is best for that day, but it's definitely a learning curve. We definitely rely a lot on his outpatient therapist and the augmentative communication clinic to help guide us and create buttons. And they're great. I can like email them and be like, hey, I need this button. And she'll either like walk me through how to do it, or she'll be like, all right, give me a day and I'll update it. There's like, it's like a cloud option based on the Smartbox. So his augmentative communication clinic can like add buttons on her end from her computer. And then I just update it. And it all sinks in. So it's pretty great.
That is awesome.
Yeah. It helps kind of take some of the load off of me if I just can't get to it, or I can't figure out how to create the buttons I want or where they should go. I just send her a list. Like right now, actually, we're collecting data because next week he has an appointment with her. So for between us at home and school, trying to see what buttons we need, or even if they just need to be moved around or to allow better access. Will be our first actual follow-up with the clinic since getting the device. So it's definitely eager to tweak it and get it more accessible than it is now for him. Right now, we're doing a lot of modeling, a lot of like accessing the page for him and then allowing him to pick the options from the page. Especially if it's something that I have to go like 2 or 3 pages in for, then, it's, I get there for him, but I always, vocalize it out loud of like, all right, we're going to go this button and then now to this button, and just kind of just modeling and always telling him what we're doing so then he can learn it on his own too.
I love that. Lastly, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about what that insurance process navigated and kind of the timeline of, I know you mentioned y'all started with an iPad. So like, how did you get the iPad, that, and then kind of like a timeline just for people in our audience to know kind of what to expect.
Yeah, so like I said, we're in Massachusetts, so it definitely differs based on where you live. But so starting with the iPad, we purchased our first iPad, and then we collected Apple gift cards for holidays to purchase
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so everyone's always like, "What can I get him?" And I'm like, "Apple gift card," and then we use that to purchase the app itself for him. And then once he got to preschool, the school provided an iPad. with
Do you remember the cost of the app? I know it's years ago, but just any idea? Like,
you don't, because the app used to be a one single time purchase. Now it's a monthly purchase.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so what's the name of the app?
TD Snap is the one we started with.
And it's a monthly, basically, subscription.
Yeah, they just changed it. Like, I want to say like less than a year ago, they just swapped it over.
Okay.
There's a lot of different apps out there. I know there's like Cough Drop, and there's like there's so many different ones. So it's some of them are free, some of them are low cost. And then I don't remember which month it is, but I think it's coming up that augmentative communication month, whichever one it is. They usually do like a big sale on apps where a lot of times they'll be like half off. So I think that's when we purchased it. We kind of waited and got it when it was cheaper. And then once he was in school provided the iPad. They also provided the app as well.
Okay.
But I was able to like log in using our email on the school's app. So then all of his buttons got put on. So we didn't have to like recreate the wheel.
Sure, absolutely.
And then back right before he started school with early intervention, we put in through insurance for a switch, a Bluetooth device to connect the iPad to the switch.
Okay.
And then we got a universal plug. I forget the exact name for it, but it's really cool. You can plug in your switch to it and then plug in like Christmas lights or like a blender or whatever, and it will allow the switch to activate whatever it is that you're trying to use.
Okay.
So we got that originally through insurance.
Okay.
Then we paid for the iPad and app out of pocket.
Okay.
And then now for the eye gaze, it was definitely a lot of data like collection. So
about how long? Like, was it a few months?
Yeah, I would say it's a few months. At first, just collecting data based off of where he was currently with the switch system.
Okay.
We got a 30-day trial.
Okay.
We got that through the augmentative communication clinic through the Children's Hospital.
Okay.
That was in December. So we did 30 days of collection of data with that eye gaze device.
Okay.
Then we submitted that. And then that's when we kind of got put on pause because we found out the new system was coming out.
Sure.
So I want to say it was February that it was technically, you could like apply for it.
Sure.
It was released in April.
Okay.
So April it was released, and then we got the device end of July.
Okay.
So yeah, it was definitely a few months. It was probably a solid 6 months, like from start to end, just even figuring out like which device did we want to trial, which camera worked better for him, which app on which device worked better. Cause there's even like different apps within devices. So you can have like certain eye gaze, but with a different app to.
Is that things you would trial and do at those clinic appointments with the speech pathologist where they would kind of help you, and then as a team collectively you'd see, and then the data would be collected on the device to say, oh yeah, this is working well, or no, this one doesn't seem to be the best fit.
Yeah, no, definitely that's what we did. So during our trial for the eye gaze, it was December, but it was school break, so we didn't get a ton of data from school, but we got data from his outpatient clinic, and then we did increased therapy appointments with the augmentative communication clinic. So we kind of doubled up for the month just to get some data in. And it was determined that, he was like understanding the cause and effect and starting to use basic signs of communication on it. So his therapist through the augmentative communication clinic did up all of the letters and all the stuff that needed to happen. We did originally, so we have our primary insurance through an employer, and then we have state Medicaid as a secondary. Our primary insurance approved it, but the state Medicaid denied it initially. They said they needed more information. So our augmentative communication clinic highlighted the information they said that they needed in the original letter and sent it back. And then it was approved. So it was, they just needed a little to to be directed on the information that they needed. So just having that team behind you that's willing to, make those letters in and, be like, yes, they're nonverbal, but they can figure this out and they were able to communicate. So some of the stuff they had me track for data, I didn't have to do as much as, the outpatient therapist, but just like ways he effectively communicated with family, ways, so whether it was, he's in the other room and he starts just even hitting any buttons to get our attention to come in, just showing he was utilizing it, more or less. So that was our children's hospital kind of geared everything. And then the outpatient therapist and school therapist kind of just provided whatever data they had.
Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your time.
Thank you.
Our guest right now is Nicole. She is going to share about their journey with AAC and communication. Nicole, I'll hand it over to you and you can go ahead and share about your experience. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So like she said, my name is Nicole. I have an 8-year-old who has HIE and has started with AAC about the time he was 2. It was a very lengthy process. When we first realized that he wasn't speaking, we had to do hearing tests to prove that it wasn't a hearing impairment causing him to be nonverbal. And we started with really simple little printout sheets like this. Sorry, let me move it.
That's okay.
So we just had a couple icons and he would point to, what he needed. And then it got upgraded.
Okay.
And then, more words were added.
Okay.
So once we were showing that we had access to language we understood, we started trialing different AAC software and different devices. So Dynavox is really popular. It didn't work out the best for us. We actually did best trialing our PRC device. At 2 and 3, he did really well with eye gaze. He has a lot of hand-eye coordination delays. And so using eye gaze, he was able to use the pupil of his eye to like hover over an icon and it would select it for him, which is awesome. Now that he's 8, he decided he's too cool for that. So he likes to touch his icons. So we can toggle through both whenever he is able to switch his input. I actually have his device here and he was very excited to show you guys how it works for him. So this is the talker and this is the largest screen. So this is a PRC Accent 1400.
Okay.
And we use Unity software primarily, but he has used New Voice at school.
Okay.
It also toggles through the same system, but he wanted to show you guys. So because we have dexterity, we have some spacing built in around the icons.
Okay.
And this is really helpful at the hospital, in a hospital setting, because he can talk to the doctors directly about things that hurt and pick all the different parts of his body.
Okay.
So it's nice, instead of me looking and kind of translating what he's signing, he can tell the doctors directly where they can hear him and kind of ask follow-up questions. His favorite, though, is his joke page. And so on here, he likes to ask people,
what do you call a bear with no teeth?
I don't know if you can hear that. It says, what do you call a bear with no teeth?
Okay.
A gummy bear.
A gummy bear. So this page is his absolute favorite.
I love that.
Social wise, this is a big kick with his friends because he likes to ask people, do you want to hear a joke? Now you tell one, which is really helpful with all his little buddies. And then at school, from like an educational perspective, he is able to do his reading and writing assignments on his tablet. Okay. He types out what he wants and either has an aide that transfers it onto a paper for him, or we were trialing a new software where he is able to pull it up on a document and he can print it right on his teacher's printer, which is amazing.
Great. Yeah.
The downside is for us, at least in Texas, we had to trial it for 3 months to show proficiency with this software and this device. And then once we finished the trial period, we had to show 3 different things that he tried and why this was the best for him. Between the device, the case, Eye gaze was just this extra little bar here. It has a mount that connects to the very back on here. So it goes right onto his wheelchair, and a stand. It came out to $14,000. Our private insurance did not want to pay for it, and we kept appealing it. And eventually his secondary insurance, which is through a Medicaid waiver through our state, ended up paying for it for him. This one is coming up on 6 years.
Okay.
And after 5, it's eligible to replace. So we have been trying to get him the new device where he's able to print to his teacher's printer since last October. So it's been a very long process. This one still works. Sometimes when it needs to be updated, it gets a little bit glitchy, and he'll struggle because he uses it so much at school. When it's updating, he's not able to access the programming. And so then he gets frustrated that he wants his voice and he doesn't have access to it. He is able to use this all throughout his daily life. Things that we have purchased out of pocket to make things easier was a charger for our car and a screen protector. When we saw the cost of it, I wanted to make sure this thing was as protected as possible because it's expensive. And for it to get fixed, we literally have to ship it off to PRC and wait for them to ship it back. Currently, there was not a loaner for us to check out. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult.
Is there anything else, that we might not have touched on that you may just want to share about, about navigating this process, or anything that you wish somebody had kind of told you about, that now that you're thinking about it, you're like, you know what, that would have been really helpful when I was, first going through this process?
One of the things I thought was really cool is every year we try to go to the Ability Expo to see what new products are emerging or services are in our area. And one year when we went there, we have Easter seals in Texas. I'm not sure if they're all throughout the United States, but our Easter seals chapter actually has something that they call bridging apps. And they have a clinic set up where if you're struggling with language acquisition or verbal output, there are all different kinds of devices and programs and apps and tablets and all different things that you can come in, and they kind of help you assess and give you a direction to go. So if you don't have a speech therapist that you're working directly with, there are different services like that where you can kind of come out and have them kind of guide you in what would be best. And then you can look into them because there's a lot of apps that you can download for tablets and even for phones, but they're very expensive. They're like $200 to $400. There is also 2 days or 2 weeks a year where those apps are like 50% off. So if that's something that you're looking into, I would definitely kind of watch for those sales because it's a big savings. And then don't get discouraged if you feel like you're trying things and you're not getting the language quite as fast. When we first got ours, we had a couple words on it and we were showing him that he could paint, and there's like apps that open and pop bubbles. And it was just getting him familiar with the device and getting him used to engaging with it. And then we would slowly introduce language. So it's been a really great resource and a tool, but it does take time and practice and their willingness to use it. But it's really neat. All different ways to gain access to it. There's switches, there's eye gaze, there's different ways you can toggle over buttons. So just keep trying and find somebody that you feel confident that is going to listen and try things with your kids for your therapist.
Thank you again for sharing your experience with us. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Yes, we have Gaby here with us. Thank you, Gaby, so much for joining us today to share about you and your family's journey with AAC and communication. So I'll go ahead and let you start sharing.
All right. Thank you, Haley. So happy to be here. So our communication device that my daughter Izzy uses is critical to her life every day, our family's life, and has made her life so much better. So my daughter is 10 years old. Her name is Isabel Grace. We call her Izzy, and she has an accent, what we call an accent device with the Empower software, and the language is called Unity 60 sequenced. So if that's not a mouthful, I don't know what is. And I always forget what it's actually called, but basically Unity is the language, accent is like the device or the computer.
Okay.
So it's not an Apple device. It's like a tablet basically.
Okay.
So she got this same software when she was about 3 years old, I believe. And she was really little. And I remember our SLP at the time said, I think we should get her a talker. And that's what we call it. And I was like, really? I was like, that seems like heavy. It's like a lot to add. Da, da, da. And she said, well, yeah, I mean, her peers are babbling and talking at school. She's going to preschool. And I was like, oh, yeah, like why? So that was interesting. I always remember that was my initial reaction was like, too much, like no. And then I'm so glad that woman pushed and she got us set up with a device, her first device. And it was just incredible. Like immediately she took to it pretty much. And the reason we chose this language and this kind of setup is it's really good for kids that struggle with fine motor control. So she has kind of like a wiggly and she's always moving. And this is based on muscle memory. So the word will always be in the location that it's in.
Okay.
So kind of like her body and her muscle memory remembers where those keys are and where those words are. And I think that's really helped her as well. The longest part was we really tried hard to import symbols that were relative to her. So I spent a lot of time taking pictures of family members and friends and so that they could import the accurate, like the real pictures or changing the words so that they made sense for her.
Okay.
And yeah, so since then we've changed, we've had, batteries changed and more often than not, she's just really rough on the device. So it's like getting a bumper put back on or a key guard put back on.
Right.
But
does she have it attached to her wheelchair or?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that is a whole other process. And surprisingly, it's a whole other person's job that does that.
Okay. That's helpful to know.
Yeah. So an occupational therapist will visit with you when you're getting your device and they will take a look at what kind of equipment they use and what, how you guys see her using it. And like the devil's in the details, that is the tricky part because is it going to fit under your dining room table? Is it going to fit at her school desk? Is it going to fit through the doorways of her school and of your home? And those are the things that really take a lot of time to sort out. So I would just say don't give up and, ask if you're not getting anywhere, ask to see the classroom set up, ask to see, the wherever you think they need to have their device. So Izzy even has a mount on her walker so that when she's in doing exercise, she has her talker. Like I forgot to say, we're in Canada. So we live in Ontario, Canada. When she was born in Iowa in the US. And the process was somewhat similar. But our SLP in Iowa set us up with a private company who issued the device and set us up with the the software and everything. And then because she had Medicaid, it was paid for through Medicaid because she had the diagnosis that she has. So.
And about how long was that process, like from maybe when they recommended and started to when you received the device?
It was pretty quick. I mean, I would say it was, I think we trialed 1 or 2 before. So that process might have taken 4 to 6 months maybe. And then just finalizing our decision. But I think we went with pretty much what she suggested. And then, I feel like we were up and running maybe within 6 or 8 months. So that was our experience with her first device. I will tell you, it has been a long journey, and it has felt like a lot or like too much at times. Absolutely. But still, there's no way I wouldn't do everything over again. So mostly what's overwhelming about it is just all the technology. So
Right.
like I was all of a sudden being taught to be now like a computer technician,
Sure.
speech and language program developer, and it just adds to your role, which can be overwhelming. So take time with yourself and be really patient with yourself. Ask for help when you need it. So yeah, patience is an understatement. Wait, and also presuming competence. Patience with you, patience with your kid. Modeling. Number one, you have to model it. And so if you don't understand how to use it, you can't model it. And once I understood really what that even means, modeling just means you using the talker in front of your kid and conversing that way. Also really improved her language development. And
Those are such great tips and advice. Gaby, I just want to thank you so much for being with us today and just sharing just all the knowledge that you have and all of your experience.
please
Absolutely.
ask any questions on here or in the Facebook group. I'm happy to be there and ask questions or answer questions.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for coming and sharing all your knowledge. So without further ado, I'm going to give it over to you, and you can go ahead and share you and your family's journey.
Thank you. Happy to be here. AAC is something very near and dear to my heart, and something that we've really focused on and prioritized throughout Emerson's life. So my daughter, Emerson, has cerebral palsy. She's GMFCS level 5. She doesn't have any speaking, no words at all, no verbal communication. She uses a wheelchair, so she's the highest level in terms of severity. And really, when she was a baby and we were first getting started on this journey, we didn't really know what was going on inside her head, because she couldn't really, communicate at all. And so early on in our journey, I read a book that was about a mother's journey with her son with CP, and how he utilized AAC and how he really was inside there and was smart and wanted to learn, and he just needed a way to communicate, to be able to go to school and learn. And he ended up writing poetry, and it was just this really amazing book, and it just like triggered me immediately to be like, wow, I need to be, communication's important. I need to figure out what's going on inside her head and push for that. So her very first communication was raising her hand, and she would raise her hand to either basically say yes or more, whether it was an activity or to say yes. And then we started working privately with a speech and language pathologist who came to our house, and she started working with that hand that would raise using switches. So getting that motion of hitting a switch. Mm-hmm. And what she was really doing in those early days was looking for an access point. Like, if we're going to use a switch, how do we access it? Does it work best if it's in front of her and she's hitting it going down? Does it work best if it's behind her hand and she hits it going back? Does it work best if it's, because Emerson's movement is so limited, her motor skills are so impacted. That was one of the most challenging things, was finding this access point of where she was going to hit these switches to be able to access communication. So that's how it all started. And in the beginning, we started out with a pod book, and the SLP was using partner-assisted auditory scanning. So it's literally having a book, and she's scanning through, reading the options. And when Emerson wants to select, say yes to, whatever it is, then she would hit the switch. And that was her earliest form of communication. So we did that from the time she was, 18 months old. We worked on it, all through preschool. And then as she, went into school, into kindergarten, that was her main form of communication, was this pod book and partner assisted auditory scanning. So in kindergarten, she had an iPad with the same pod language that she had been using in the book, but she also could use the books. They flip back and forth depending on which she's more motivated to use at school or wherever. That first device, the iPad, it was just an iPad that we had. It wasn't funded by anything.
Okay.
And we purchased the Pod the app for the iPad. We potentially could have gotten funding for it, but it was, I don't know, at the time it was a couple $100, and we just it wasn't a fight that we were ready to wage yet, since it was fairly reasonable in terms of the cost of it.
Okay.
In, I want to say maybe the first grade, she was doing well enough with the iPad that we decided to invest in getting her a dedicated device. So at that point, her SLP determined that a Tobii Dynavox, I forget exactly which model it was, at the time would be the best for her. And so we would support her use of Pod and auditory scanning. And the thing that the dedicated device did that was better than the iPad is the Tobii device allowed us to put a personal speaker by her ear.
Okay.
So for all of that auditory scanning that happens before she actually says something, that can be very confusing to her peers, to teachers, to people around her, because when the scanning is happening and everyone can hear it, they think she's saying all that stuff. It's hard for everybody to understand that the device is just scanning right now and she hasn't actually like selected something.
Okay.
So the Tobii device, we were able to connect a speaker for her so that she's the only one that hears the auditory scanning cues.
Okay.
And then it wouldn't actually broadcast until she said something.
Okay.
So we used the Tobii device.
One question for you was that also still connected to the switch, or was that separate? So do you mind just sharing a little bit about how that connection works and what that sequence would look like?
So she was still using single switch scanning, and she had one little jelly bean switch that was mounted to her chair and is right behind her right shoulder, and she would raise her hand, and that's how she would activate the switch. And the switch was just plugged into her device, like it was just connected directly to her device. Around fourth or fifth grade, between fourth and fifth grade, we learned about a new device from a company called Control Bionics, and it was called a NeuroNode, and it has a Bluetooth switch that you can that you can wear, and is motion activated. And we trialed that device. And the idea was, instead of having this switch behind her hand that she had to like get all the way back to, and on different days her body would move different ways, and if she was off a little bit, sometimes she would go to hit the switch, but she wouldn't hit the switch, or the switch wouldn't activate. Anyway, the idea with the Bluetooth switch and her being able to wear it is that she could make smaller movements. And the motion would activate the device. So the hope was that it would be less fatiguing. She'd have more output because she could do faster hits and more hits and last for longer. So it wasn't perfect. We trialed it. It wasn't perfect. There are some things that happen with the Bluetooth wearable switch. For example, in the car, there's a lot of false activations, or if you're moving and you're going over bumpy ground. But ultimately, we decided that it worked pretty well for her. And so we switched to that device. We continue to use the same language, the Pod language. And that new device is, like I said, it's called Control Bionics NeuroNode Trilogy. It actually can do eye gaze also. We don't do eye gaze with Emerson. Here's something I do want to address. Emerson has cortical vision impairment, and which is pretty common, I know, in kids with HIE. And for her, we did trial at one point eye gaze, but she couldn't track, she couldn't focus, her eyes divert a lot to the right, so she was only getting part of the screen. Ultimately, her speech therapist did not think that eye gaze was a good match for her. So that's why we stuck with the switch scanning. I do think that often with our complex kids, eye gaze becomes the default and may not always be the best option. So if your child is, given eye gaze and you're not having success for it, I just want parents to know there are other options, particularly for our really complex kids whose, tracking and vision and all that sort of stuff may not be strong enough for eye gaze, because eye gaze is hard, man. I don't know if you try it yourself, I mean, even with fully functioning eyes, it's hard. It's a lot of work. But it's great for people who, for kids that do, that can use it. It is great. And it is a direct select technique, which, that's ideal is if you can do direct select, because that's quickest and the least cumbersome. But we have other forms of communication for her too. So we still rely on, she can still use a pod book if she wants to. We have, for school stuff, she uses a lot of multiple choice. We use her eyes a lot. We also have worked on her eyes. And she looks to the right for yes and to the left for no. And we use that a lot for questions. So we're letting her, we've always let her say what she wants to say with her device, and not force her to always use her device. She can choose which form of communication. And then, so this device, it was a very expensive device, and it was a bit of a battle to get it. We switched our insurance a year or so before that, and it was the first time that we ended up with insurance that specifically excluded speech generating devices. So our insurance was not going to pay for it. However, we are in California, and we do have pretty good resources here for all that kind of stuff. So we have, Emerson has Medi-Cal, which is our California version of Medicaid. And we also have here in California what's called California Children's Services. And so we went through California Children's Services to be able to fund the device, but they don't make it easy. They make you jump through a lot of hoops. We had to see a lot of specialists. We had to have a lot of extra kind of evaluations. They had to evaluate us there at CCS. We had to see doctors that didn't even make sense to AAC use. For example, they insisted that we get a report from our ENT, our ear, nose, and throat doctor, which has nothing to do with AAC use or why a person can't speak. So that's how little they know about what they're doing. And
that's just very, that's just a lot of appointments and a lot of time, and just kind of extending the process much longer for sure.
Right. So, but we didn't give up, and ultimately they did fund it. So
about how long was that process? Like from maybe when you reached out to start to when the device was funded and you received it?
I think it was about 6 months.
Okay.
And again, the most important part about all of this is just the consistency and the access. It's not ever a question whether Emerson is going to have her device with her and up and running. And it's just like her wheelchair. You know what I mean? She can't leave the house without her wheelchair because that's her mobility. She can't leave the house without her access to communication. I will say another thing that was really cool about the Bluetooth switch is she doesn't have to be in her wheelchair to use it now, which previously when she had the switch that was attached to her wheelchair and all of that, she pretty much had to be in her wheelchair. Now she wears this Bluetooth switch on her wrist. And one of the things that we did right when we first got this device is on weekend mornings, we insist she stay in bed a little longer than she likes and maybe watch YouTube or watch the iPad or something along those lines, because we don't want to get up at 5 a.m. on the weekends, even though she still does.
Sure.
But yeah, so she's still using that device and still learning how to use it. And, she grows with it every day. And the other thing that we are always doing is updating it and adding things that are relevant to her. So we've always worked really closely with school for adding words, whether it's vocabulary words or they're working on a specific book or a unit, what are the school words and the vocabulary words that we need to add so that she can use her device to participate in school stuff. And the same, now that she's a teen, we're constantly updating it with the teen lingo and all the words that her peers are using so that she can do that as well. And then we can put fun stuff on there too. You know, she's a big Taylor Swift fan. So we have a whole page of a couple of pages where she can play Taylor Swift videos and choose to do that herself, or to put Taylor Swift facts in there that she can share. She has an Alexa page where she can, you know, ask Alexa to do something. That's another thing that we're working on. We just renovated our house and we've chosen to make it a really smart house in the hopes that she become more and more independent within our home and utilize Alexa to control her environment, to watch TV or play music, or all, and that too is a work in progress. Sometimes she's successful and sometimes she isn't, but that's the goal. We always set the bar really, really high for her. But it's been a really slow process. And I think that's like my key thing with Emerson, with really, really complex kids with really, really complex bodies. Don't give up, because we just always prioritized it and dedicated ourselves to it and kept working with the speech therapist, but always ensured that her device was on her chair. And sometimes, you know, we'd go days or weeks without her really saying anything meaningful. But we always made sure she had access, because you never knew when something was going to pop up and she would just say something that would like motivate you to keep sticking with it because it was so powerful and meaningful. I just wanted to share one more thing. I think one of the biggest things to do also is just to presume competence in your child, even when you don't know. Just assume that they're in there and they have something to say, and work really hard to help them, you know, to support the efforts for them to be able to communicate, because it's so communication to everything it's so important to everything they do in life. And you'll encounter a lot of experts and people who don't believe in your kids. So you have to be their advocate and you have to believe in them, and you have to find the people that believe in your kids too. And we'll do everything to support the effort to get them there, because it's so, so worth it. And I've had to fire a lot of people in her life that, you know, didn't believe in her. And I've always found the people who do, and it's made all the difference.
Absolutely. Having that team around your child that's just there to encourage them, that is absolutely so important. Thank you again, Dawn, so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Haley.
Bye.